So I'm very excited to be here and to moderate this panel. We've got a fantastic panel for you tonight. One of the things I will ask is that we want to have a conversation with you. This is not, panelists and I have all agreed that we're not going to just go down the line and answer questions. We'll have a conversation together and like you to join because many of you, I suspect, already have startups in this space and will have both views and questions about things. And so feel free, I'll try to keep an eye on the audience. And if I don't see you when you raise your hand, then speak up and we'll definitely go forward. So let me introduce the panel. We have one more panelist who's going to be joining us. Hopefully soon. And when he gets here, we'll introduce him as well. Ed Mcguire is currently Managing Director of Software Research at Clsa. Ed is a guy who has thought deeply about this. And I was tempted when I read some of his reports to say, here, just read one of your reports to them. But at the end of the day, I decided that probably wouldn't be that interesting. So he's going to start off with a little bit of an overview of things. We've got Christina Mercando, who's the founder and head of product at Ringley. She'll tell you a little bit more about what Ringley does, but it's a very interesting consumer product, connected and having to really focus hard on form factor and miniaturization and thinking of fashion and consumers. Then we've got Zack Schildhorn. He's a partner at Lux Capital. So we've got the big thinker analyst. We've got a couple of entrepreneurs, and we've got the investor. So he's going to talk to us. Lux, Zack's very active in marketing operations and investments at the intersection of the digital and physical worlds. One of the things that's so interesting about this space to me is, for many years, software is going to eat the world, right? And hardware companies weren't sexy. Nobody wanted to do hardware. It's changing. And so Zack's one of the people who's thinking about this from an investment perspective. And then we've got Adam Sager, who's the founder and CEO of Canary, which is a next generation security company. You look at Nest and other connected home things, Adam's in that space of connecting devices within the home, and also an interesting space. One of the big themes in terms of Internet of Things is how to deal with the home. How do you deal with different devices within the home? And so he'll deal with that. What I'd like to do is I will ask each of you to do sort of just a 30-second version of what you're doing or what your biggest picture issues are right now and what you're thinking about, and then we'll sort of start the conversation. So I'll start with you, Ed.
Great. I'm Ed Mcguire. I'm a research analyst at Clsa. It's a research broker that we're not conflicted by investment banking, so I get to do a lot of free thinking without any other considerations. I've been focusing on the Internet of Things topic for almost a year. Last year, started to see a number of forces coming together. These massive market sizings. A lot of companies are investing, real dollars. And when you started to see a lot of M&A, PTC or Parametric had bought a couple of platform companies last year. They're very much in the product design side of the market. When Google paid $3.2 billion for Nest, I think that raised a lot of eyebrows and caused people to really look at what was going on underneath this concept of connected products. There's a lot of capital going into the space right now. There are technology accelerators, cheap hardware, open source software, a lot of these platforms, different types of connectivity, and then also the idea that you have a consumer or corporate or industrial internet that's really just touching almost every industry that we see. And when you start to see Uber's valuation at $40 billion, which is kind of eye-popping, and the consequent disruption of industries, what I think about and what I've been looking at a lot at is, what happens when you take a lot of these industries that have used proprietary or operational technology in the past and are now adopting information technology for the first time. So when you instrument physical devices, machines, processes, and you get data, you can optimize it, you can create new business models, but there are also risks. There are risks to existing businesses and jobs. And so that's a lot of what I think about. And of course, the consumer side is really exciting. So I'll pass that over to Christina.
Great. Yeah, I'm Christina, the CEO and founder of Ringley, and we are the makers of smart jewelry and accessories. So my ring that I'm wearing right now is connected to my phone, and it will vibrate and flash. Oh, I'm getting a text right now, actually. Not planned. It will flash a little color and vibrate to let me know if I'm getting a call or a text or an email. And we leave the control up to the user, so it's meant to be like your little personal assistant, letting you know when someone important is trying to reach you, when your Uber car is arriving, when you have an important meeting coming up, and you can set it up however you want. So if you want to filter your notifications to only allow certain things to come through, you can set it up that way. If you want to know every time someone likes your Instagram picture, you can also set it up that way. And the area of focus for us is really the future of wearables, and how we see the space is similar to how we buy clothing. So we believe that in the future, people are going to be buying and shopping for electronics the way that today they shop for clothing. So as you all see, you're all wearing different shoes, and they all serve sort of different functions. We believe you're going to be buying your wearables the way that you might buy different pairs of shoes. You might wear certain ones when you go to the gym. You might wear certain ones when you're at a cocktail party versus when you're at work. So that's the way that we see the space shaping out. And I'm excited to be here today.
Great, thanks.
Hi, I'm Zack. I'm with Lux Capital. We're a venture capital firm with offices here in New York and in Menlo Park. We have a little over $700 million under management. We just closed a new fund this past Friday. And for our entire history, we've always focused on big, crazy ideas. So our companies are doing everything from launching satellites to brand new satellite communications technology, from 3D printing to 3D scanning and recreating virtual worlds, nuclear waste cleanup, surgical robotics, really big stuff. And I got interested in this space a few years ago, really because I believe that technology wants to be everywhere. And today there is an enormous gap between the widescreens on our walls and the portals in our pockets and the real world in which we live. And I think in a certain period of time, and I can't tell you if that's 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, but we will all look back and say, I cannot believe the world was like that, because it will seem so dumb and so slow and so inefficient. And I think you're going to see that across many different industries and many different types of products. And I guess my job is to try to find those amazing people who are bringing those products and ideas to life.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam. One of the co-founders and CEO of Canary. This is our product. It's a smart home security device, video and audio and temperature and humidity and air quality, motion detection, night vision, speaker, a siren, lots of other things in one device. The idea is just to simplify the security experience in a home and use data analytics, machine learning, and science, different types of science, computer vision, deep learning technologies to really understand what's happening in a home environment. And if something is abnormal for you in your specific home, then we send you a notification. We try to give you information on how to connect to your local police, your neighbor, your spouse, anyone else. It's really designed to take the entire security experience that you've seen from an ADT and simplify it into a 30-second setup and a beautiful device for your home. The things we think about are probably a little bit different from others. It's not that we don't think there is an Internet of Things. There probably is something called the Internet of Things, but the way we look at it is in very specific areas that we're focused on solving a problem and a specific problem, which is how do people know that their family's okay and that their home is not broken into, and that if there's a fire, they would know about it and be informed quickly. These are specific problems that people have. A lot of movement we've seen in the space aren't problem-based, they're solution-based. So you come up with a solution and you then find a problem for that solution. And the adoption of some of those solutions has been a little bit slower.
Google Glass, anyone?
Google Glass, or just walk into Home Depot or Lowe's and you'll see 50 devices that no one's buying. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good that there's innovation. Perhaps it's a little confusing for some consumers. It's confusing for me sometimes. The way we see it is a slow progression over time of very specific problems that are being solved. And the reason why I think we've seen companies like Nest explode is because they had a very specific problem they went after that people had a pain point around and they needed a better solution for. Not because they built a Internet of Things connected home platform. Now that they're building Internet of Things connected home platform, jury's out on if anyone cares. And so we have a close eye on what's happening in the market, and we look after it. But in terms of us and our company, we've been around for about 2.5 years. We've been building our product based here in New York, and just focused on very specific this solution, other solutions that solve users' problems.
So I think Adam's comments actually are a good kicking off point to talk a little bit about an overview here, because the things he's describing are about a market that is still in its early stages. There are a lot of people out there trying different things. It reminds me a lot of people with broadband solutions 15 years ago, right? That I had a number of clients that were trying to figure out ways that monetized services over a broadband connection, but only 15-20% of homes were connected. That problem solved, and now people are using different things. And so, internet is there, and you can do all the broadband type things, and SaaS and cloud is letting people do things at a much higher level. So people have kind of figured out, if we have ubiquitous broadband connectivity, we can do some things with it. And now we're moving to this point of looking at a market where we're connecting the devices. And a big part of the thing we'll talk about here is, what is the use case? And so there's an element where you do have to solve a problem. These devices are generating billions and billions of points of data. And part of the question is going to be, is that important, and how to use it? Is the use case a notification use case where you don't really care about the data? You may or may not care about the data. We'll ask about this later in terms of how people actually use the device. But you're saying, I'm solving a problem for you of notification in a nice form factor. And so, and how people think about that. There are others. I talked last week to the CEO of Strava. For those of you who are cyclists, it's the go-to app for the cycling community and other athletic communities as well. But he talked about that. They looked at this as really building a community of people, and then architected a data platform that can handle the billions of points of data, so that I can go compete and be screened against people. If I go do laps in Central Park, they're working on taking smartphones or Garmin devices or otherwise, connecting that data, and then letting me connect to other people who are doing what I'm doing. And so I think that people are trying different things and trying to do different models. I'm going to ask you, Ed, my sense, and maybe give us a little bit of a high-level overview how you're thinking about this. I know in one report you said you think it's in the first inning, which, if you're in a baseball game, this is the first inning of the baseball game. I think three general categories. Industrial, which we don't have anybody in the industrial side here, but I think it's something that a number of us can talk about to a certain extent. The home, a big area in terms of Internet of Things, connecting the home. And you're, Adam's right. I've got a client who's trying to deal with things in the home, and I've worked with the home security companies who are trying to do connected home. People coming out from different directions, and everybody talks about the fact that there's all these products at Home Depot that nobody's buying. And so, the part of the question is, how do you convince people? And then the consumer and wearable. The Apple iWatch, obviously coming out, has been announced and shown the form factor. Like so many things, the rumored functionality of the iWatch last year is substantially greater than the actual functionality of the first version, which doesn't mean that it's not going to be a transformative product. But looking at how that connects, with a Ringley or with other kinds of products, interested to hear your thoughts about that when we get there, Christina. So, Ed, could you give us, sort of, from your perspective, what are the big themes that people are thinking about? How are they, and what do you think the big problems are as we try to form a solution?
I'm going to point to agriculture, which is the kind of the oldest job in humanity, growing food. And this is an industry that's been toil and sweat, and you've had farmers' almanacs. I mean, it's historically been a really manual process. A year ago, Monsanto bought Climate Corp for $930 million, and it kind of gobsmacked everybody in the industry. Like, what are these guys doing? The reality is that there's an enormous amount of data that can be captured from soil sensors, humidity sensors. Look at pH. I mean, farmers have about 40 different decisions that they have to make in every growing period, and when you can combine sensors with a whole bunch of data, that have smart machines that can tell you, what to plant, what varieties to plant, when to water them, how to fertilize them, and then use, for instance, use drones, unmanned aerial vehicles to survey them for pestilence. You actually make it, this is really a more fundamental change, because you go from selling stuff, we call it truly picks and shovels and seed and fertilizer, from actually selling yield management solutions. And what's going on in the industry is that when you connect up products and you have visibility into how people are using them, and if you're able to see a problem in a machine, in a jet engine, and fix it before it breaks. That's concept of preventive maintenance is a big theme that comes on. There's a lot of these very asset-intensive industries that may end up going through some fundamental changes. And I'd point people to, where do we see the Internet of Things? Well, look at Tesla. I mean, it's sort of hard to see Tesla. There's not a lot of Teslas here in New York, but what Tesla is basically an iPad on wheels. It collects all this data and it beams it back to the mothership. And what they do is they analyze it. They look at how people are using the technology. They respond. They think like a technology company. So they're iterations of functionality. And then every 2 weeks they beam out software updates. So you fire up the car, and all of a sudden you've got Tesla 8.25 whatever. So there are ways that companies are thinking about businesses, and you get into concepts like sharing economy, when you can share assets, because when you understand when they break and what the useful life of an asset is, you can change your business model to actually selling service levels. Now I'll leave actually one final example, which I think is really struck me as being really profound in the way that in big industrial companies are thinking about their business. Philips Lighting, they make the Hue lights that are they're expensive. The LED lights, they concluded a contract with the subway system in Washington, D.C., the metro system. And the metro system has like 25,000 lights and 160 stations. And normally they'd send, this being D.C., they would send crews of about 10 or 12 people out to look. It's like, oh, do we need to, believe me, that's, the pothole crews are like 25 people in D.C., but that's another story entirely. But what they, as part of the contract, Philips can actually Wi-Fi connect all the bulbs in the stations. They can optimize the usage of energy, because they can tell when it's light, when it's dark, when there's special events, when you need to have safety. You can have flashing lights if there's an issue. And they have a 10-year contract to sell lighting as a service. Philips owns all the bulbs. They're not they're not looking for growth when the bulbs break. It's not about planned obsolescence anymore. They're now incented to build products that are better, that are going to last, and they now have a recurring revenue service model. So you're taking software as a service, and now you get to physical products as a service. This is profound. This actually, we'll start to see this ripple through a lot of other industries over the next few years. But that's, that to me has struck me, I think, is really the most consequential impact of what we're seeing.
That's great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to skip over and ask Zack a little bit in terms of investable themes right now. Are there particular areas that you guys are staying away from just because you think it's too early? And are there particular areas that you think are underappreciated that you actually think are ready right now for investment in terms of where things are? Do you have products? Do you have products that are actually solving a problem as opposed to in search of a solution, in search of a market?
As a firm, generally, we tend to avoid areas that are very crowded, just because it's harder to pick winners. And a very wise investor once told me that if you're not invested in one of the first 3 or 4 companies that's really going after a new sector, it's already too late. One of those companies will emerge. And when you have 50 companies all trying to make the same smart object, that's really hard. So
what are some areas that already have 50 companies making a smart object? Smart light bulbs?
Smart light bulbs is one example. I think there are so many health and fitness trackers. It's really difficult. It's really noisy. I think there are a lot of areas. There are some areas in the consumer space that are like that. But there are a lot of areas that no one's really thinking about or talking about, and I'll be biased and share some examples from our own portfolio, but both involve bringing the internet and connectivity to areas where it's really never existed before. And the first is in the electrical grid. If Alexander Graham Bell walked into this room today and saw an iPhone, he'd have no idea what it was. But if Edison walked in and saw how the grid was laid out, he'd recognize it immediately. It hasn't changed, one-way system. That's changing because all of a sudden we have two-way electric flows because of electric vehicles, home energy storage, distributed generation. And the utilities, they have no idea how to handle this, and they're under a huge amount of pressure from a regulatory and consumer safety perspective to continue to deliver on their promise of stable, safe power. So we are invested in a company called Gridco Systems that effectively is building a power router for the distribution grid. Naimish Patel is the founder and CEO. He formerly built Sycamore Networks back in the heyday of the internet, and it's taking everything he learned about networking and bringing that into the electric grid, leveraging a lot of the high power electronic circuitry that's coming out of the automotive industry so they can have scale. And they're effectively building these power routers. The challenge in going after an industry like that is you have a customer that's very slow. And you need to apply a lot of pressure and make them move. But if you can, and if you can be the dominant solution, it's an absolutely massive greenfield opportunity.
I mean, so it is interesting that goes in the same place as agriculture at a certain level, because sometimes the greatest opportunities are in these industries that have been slow to adopt technology.
I
So it
think
means
we're
you
still
have a lot
so early, though. I mean, people talk. I can't tell you how many companies come in and pitch a device or a connected product, and then say, "Well, but it's really all about the data." And everybody says that, but nobody knows what it means. Nobody knows what they're doing with all the data. We haven't even collected the data yet. We're not connecting to access the data, and that's the first step. And I really like Kevin Kelly, who's really a brilliant technology thinker, and he came out with a book called What Technology Wants. And what's important isn't what something does, but what happens when everybody has one, right? So like Nest today is an interesting company because they've been able to sell a lot of great products. But why Google is really interested and excited is because what happens if everybody gets a Nest or a Nest product? Like, what can you do all of a sudden with that company? And so it's the exciting idea about the future, but still nobody knows what that means.
Right. Okay, so we got that challenge. The challenge of okay, go ahead.
Some people know what that means.
Yes.
I agree that that the data side is overblown. Everyone's talking about it. In our first week we shipped devices, we had over 1 billion data points, 1 billion in one week, and it's irrelevant. Most of them are completely irrelevant, right? They're relevant data points that we'll never use and doesn't even matter, and we're not, we didn't turn around and say, look at all this data we have that's completely irrelevant.
The temperature in your house stayed stable all day.
Exactly. 72 degrees, perfect, yeah. But that being said, there are things you can do. I completely agree with the latter point that the more access points you have, the more data that's relevant in different places, you can do so much more with it. But you can do those same things on a small scale, right? Inside one home, for instance. I mean, we're biased to the home. We're focused on the home. I know less about agriculture or industrial, but inside one home, you can start to learn about a family and their habits and do just so much more than what a family can do without that information, without that data. From knowing patterns of behavior to how comfortable the home is, like the very, very basic level, to knowing if people are, there's a study that came out, I believe of Harvard a few months back, where based on when people turn the nightlight, their nightlight off or their room light off at night, they could tell how depressed people were. And they applied that information. Basically, if there was a change in pattern of just the light going off, they could then come back and say, well, this person might actually be a little bit depressed, and maybe it will impact their grades. And they looked and saw it actually did impact their grades in school. Very basic things, but it take a lot of understanding. It's not just about having the data, but it's having a purpose for that data and for that information around it.
Alarm.com is a company down in DC that is working on connected home. They came from the security side, and they've got this great ad, sort of like little play school figures, and they say, the parents are away on vacation, and their teenage children are at home, and they have this thing. They say your kids are at home safely alone, and the door opens, right? And they get an alert. The door opens. And it opens again, and it opens again, and so essentially, the party notification is that the front door is going, open and shut. So the idea of there are events in the course of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, that you can use this as more of that idea of notification. So I'm going to actually go to Christina, because I think a lot of these things, the things you're talking about in terms of thinking about data, it's not that you're doing analysis of somebody's sleep patterns with this, but you can figure out if you want to notify people. You can notify people if they're not being efficient with their power. So how do you think about it? In the consumer space is very interesting, because you're selling a fashion product, and what's the price point?
We're $195 right now.
Okay, so $195. You've got to pack a lot of stuff into a fashionable product, that you have to get out to the market very quickly for $195. What do you think the use case is? How are you, conveying this to people as we talk about wearables and things like that, right? How do you say this is different from other things, and why we would be interesting to you? And frankly, what pushback are you getting from your initial market test?
Well, I mean, again, when I first started, it was a similar thing where wearables wasn't as talked about or as buzzy as it was today. It was just the fact that I wanted to solve a problem that I had in my own life. So this was over 2 years ago when I had the idea for Ringley, and it was because I was out to dinner one night, and I, was having a good time with my friends. I went up to leave, and then I pull out my phone, and I had all these angry messages from people like, "Where the heck are you? Why aren't you returning my calls? Blah blah blah." And it was something that happened to me all the time. And the only solution was to leave your phone out on the table.
You can solve that, right? You just text all the way through dinner. It's very easy.
And have it interrupt those special moments. And so I was like, I wonder if I could do both things. I can answer these people, make them feel better, and I can also enjoy the moment with my friends. And so I looked down at my hands one day, and I wear a lot of jewelry, and I said, I wonder if I can put technology in here and have it help me, and have it make have my jewelry be smart, and have it do the things that I was telling you about, and have it be my little personal assistant. And that's when I started looking into it. And I was very fortunate that at that time, when Bluetooth Low Energy came out, and I think that's why you're starting to see a lot more smart products in the market. Because before that, we would have never been able to get it into a form factor of this size. And it took a lot of work even back then. I mean, even 2 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been able to get it this size. Things have just evolved even in the past 2 years that allow us to get things more miniaturized. But I mean, when you go back to the data question too, I mean, we are collecting data right now, right? We have the internet, so it's just a different form of data, and it's how you interpret it differently. So I used to work at this company called Hunch, which was a machine learning company, and we were collecting data about people that would come to the site and answer a bunch of questions. And I think it's the same thing, only now with wearables and with smart home, it's just more automated data that you're collecting.
And obviously, there's also companies out there helping with big data. You got Splunk and Tableau and other people who are taking this data and helping to put it in some sort of meaningful form factor. I do think that people are, that the data point is one they pitch to the investors as there's a big opportunity here because there's all this stuff we can do. And I do think eventually that that's probably true. Over time, if you figure out, collect it all now, and maybe it'll take a year or two before we figure out what the use case is. But at some point, somebody's going to have the brainstorm, and the person who's got the data, I think, is going to have a leg up. In terms of data, Ed, what are some of the interesting things that you're seeing people actually do with it? Because I do think there are companies who have started to think about this. I mean, you mentioned Uber at the beginning of evaluation. At some level, they're creating a grid, right? They're creating a delivery grid and an information grid in terms of transportation. They're moving it into broader logistics points. Over time, they're going to be, they want to be in a position where they can be sort of physical delivery of goods as a service, right? That's kind of, but they're doing that because of data they have about where the drivers are and where the people are, and where do they have to locate folks. Yeah. So on the data side, what's been interesting to you?
I think there's a misperception when you start hearing these numbers that get thrown around that all of a sudden that you're going to have 50 billion devices that are all going to be tweeting away a lot of data that all of a sudden our cellular networks are going to get jammed up, and we're going to have to buy tons and tons of storage to store all this data. The reality is that just like any data, there's only a very small subset that's valuable and actionable. So the trick for anybody is to winnow down all of that data, find that needle in a haystack, as quickly and efficiently as possible. And in the past, it used to be that storage was so expensive that if you were doing physics research, for instance, you'd have to say, okay, well, I am only going to store these sets of data, and there was this selection bias. So, you would have to, you were missing something, but you'd have to make these decisions up front because you were limited in terms of the amount of data that you could analyze. Now storage is so cheap, and you have all these, you have Hadoop and all these open source systems. So you just throw everything in there, and it doesn't really solve the problem because you still have to figure out which of that data is valuable. So some of the interesting stuff that's happening, at least on an architectural level right now, is for instance, Cisco is talking about this concept of fog computing, where you actually have analytics at the edge. So the idea is that you don't need to look through all the data to figure out what's valuable. IBM has been doing some work with jet engines, and you might hear GE talk about, there's a terabyte of data that gets generated by a jet engine and 400 different types of data that come out of it every day. The reality is only 10 of those 10 types of data actually mean anything to anybody who's doing maintenance. So you're starting to see this concept of fog computing, sort of edge analytics, where you have sort of very rapid processing at the edge. And I would say that something like an alert is a very high value piece of data, right? And you make that decision up front that when somebody who's important to you is texting you, you get a special notification. This is how a lot of companies are thinking about this. I mean, I do think that this idea of using big sets of populations is particularly useful, like in healthcare. There's a company called Clsa, that's developed these thermometers that are very cheap, cheap enough to go into emerging markets. And what they're trying to do is, like, they're not selling thermometers. They're being able to track outbreaks of epidemics and work with epidemiology. So there are a lot of true big data problems, but ultimately it comes down to finding what that important data is, and in many cases it's the it's decisions you make up front that are going to be the most valuable.
So I'm actually sorry that Alex isn't here. He's the CEO of Placemeter, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about something we talked about when we were preparing for this panel. Placemeter is basically a software company that can take an iPhone, and you can put your iPhone on a little cradle in your window with your camera pointing out, and they can track activity in the street. And they'll pay you for the data that you get, anonymizing the people who walk through, like Google Street View does. But one of the things they're talking about is they're actually talking about now building a hardware product, their own thing, as opposed to a used iPhone or an iPod or whatever. All of us have the old version of Android or iPhone sitting around. And we talked a lot about this. They're software people who are now talking about designing hardware. And Christina came at it from the perspective of they're designing hardware, and then they're going to deal with the software piece. Adam did an fairly integrated piece of things in terms of, you obviously knew you're going to have to do the software to connect all of this stuff, but you also have a very elegant piece of hardware as you sort of casually walk through all the things that little piece of hardware does that can sit on a bookshelf. And I think about, years ago trying to figure out some basic security camera thing. It took me frickin' forever to set something up that didn't actually work, because it just, nothing connected cleanly. So let's talk a little about this intersection of hardware and software, because I think my experience is that they're two totally different kinds of people usually who have done the two. You've got the sort of elegant design people who are doing things. Then you've got the the software people who are working in a software stack and they think the physical world is stupid because why would you go in the physical world when you can deal with software? So how do you guys bridge that gap? How do you build a team? This is going to go a little more practical level. How do you think about these things? What are the challenges that you have? And this is one that that Alex was pretty blunt about it. He said, look, we're a bunch of software people, and it's actually really hard to design hardware. We got to figure out, where do we get it manufactured? What are the issues? Christina, you got to deal with form factor issues. What can we cram into a ring? How big can it be? Chunky jewelry's in, but right. And then what's the power life of that? How long does it last before somebody has to do something with it? And can you put a solar panel on there? So I think I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this, and I'll also ask the audience. If you've got questions or thoughts about this, please jump in, because I think this is actually at the core of what people are thinking about right now in the practical world of actually making things that connect to the internet.
We talk about this a lot inside our company, and from the beginning, we've talked about, are we a software company? 2/3 or more of the engineers on our team are software engineers, or are we a hardware company? Because obviously we have a hardware product, or something different. It's a choice. It really is a choice. Like, what are you going to focus on? And we knew from day one that we're actually neither. We're a product company. And there's a big difference in actually saying that, because when you're a software company, the way you build the company is very different from if you're building a hardware company or if you're building a product company. Building a software company, there's iterations that can happen on a weekly basis. You're continuously making a product better every single day, every single week. You're rolling out new features in a seamless way to the user often, especially if it's cloud-based software or an app. And that is just normal software practice that you see at Google, at Facebook, and other places. If you're a hardware company, then software is second. And you're building this hardware product, you're spending all your time building it, and then you have to make sure that it works, right? You have to make sure there's software that enables it, that it works, but that really comes second. And we've seen a lot of that in the market. You've seen a lot of security lapses, and you've seen, terrible software, terribly designed software, things that just don't work half the time. And the reason is because it really doesn't matter to those companies. They're hardware companies. From a product perspective, there are product companies out there. You have to think about everything as one thing, right? The hardware, the software, the design, the marketing, everything you're doing around this product is actually just one problem, one thing you're solving that you're working towards. And we realized that early on, because we knew if we tried to be just one of those things, that we wouldn't have an effective solution for the market we were in.
So do you have Dilbert moments where so the hardware guys say, here's what we're going to do, and or the software people more likely say, here's what we're going to do, and the hardware guys say, yeah, right. Come back to me when we have a real life.
I mean, the last year and a half has been, for a few months, the hardware team will be, farther advanced than the software team, then they'll switch, and then they'll switch back, and there's a natural conflict between the different groups and with marketing and other business functions. But that conflict isn't a bad thing. It just drives people to perform even better.
That's great. So, Christina, how about your view? And then I'm going to ask Zack about how he's actually seen this in play with companies that he works with.
Well, it's interesting for me because I came from a software background. So again, I was a product designer before this, and the first thing I when I had the idea for Ringley, naturally was I just immediately designed and built the iOS app before I had any hardware, before I had tested anything, and that's actually what I was able to pitch to investors. So we did sort of build the software first a little bit, and then found the hardware team. But it is really important to have everything super integrated, and you need the best in class in each of those fields. So for us, it's hardware, software, jewelry design, then you have marketing, then you have industrial design. I mean, there's so many parts of this, of creating a product at the end of the day. And you have to, like you were saying, you have to have all those parts come together seamlessly. But for us, it was important to map out the entire user experience before diving into either, the hardware and diving into like all the nitty gritty behind it. So that's sort of where we started.
So you're kind of in the same place. You're a product company at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So Zack, what have you seen? You don't have to name names if they're horror stories.
No, I think it's a good question. There are a few things that I think have made software companies in the past really successful businesses. You can prototype very quickly. So you have an idea, by the end of the day, perhaps you could have an iteration of that idea. You can scale almost infinitely very quickly, and there are many companies who have built services around that and platforms around that, helping software companies scale. And you can basically field deploy updates to outside to users in a relatively easy way and an increasingly seamless way now that many things are cloud service enabled. Hardware looks very different from that. There are elements of that, but it's very different. The good news is that it has become increasingly easy to prototype hardware due to things like Arduino, programmable microcontrollers, 3D printing. All of a sudden, you can get a functional product pretty quickly. And that's a big deal because anytime you're selling a vision or working on something, it helps so much to have a physical instantiation of that, particularly with investors. So that's really good news. I think that's one reason we've seen the proliferation of many new hardware companies. The second thing is the scalability. Like software, infinitely scalable. You just spool up, go, deploy. So hardware is not like that. There are timelines, there's design for manufacturing, there's working with your contract manufacturers.
There's LA port problems I got a client right now that basically is, they're in trouble because basically they can't get deliveries of their hardware product from China.
There's tooling, it's complex. But at the back end of that, so the middle part I think is still a little broken, but the back end of it, which is field updatable, has really changed a lot, I think, due to the advent of connected products. Because now internet is so pervasive and because it's relatively inexpensive to have connectivity built into a device, you can update products and make them not only work better over time, which is a key feature, and add more over time to something that you bought, which I think is a hallmark of some really successful connected products. But you can fix issues that are wrong, and that's a big deal.
I mean, so it's interesting because obviously Apple is a key example of a product company, and that's how they look at it. And over time they've morphed and changed as they think about this. But I think the point also about the ability for hardware manufacturers to be nimble now. Two examples that are clients of mine that I had. One was a company that started probably 10 years ago, and they were trying to do low power Wi-Fi, and their whole thing would have been to go into shipping containers, and they were starting this idea of an information cloud where they could put a sensor on a small device and have it connected by Wi-Fi and then provide information. Where's your container? Where, and they could put satellite on it if they needed to go out to sea. But every time they needed to do something, they were actually hardware people, and they had to go do a mask set, and they had to go do new silicon, and then they had to figure out the time to get the wafers back because they were doing something that was totally unique on the hardware side. They spent $50 million, and they ended up selling the company for $5 million to somebody because they didn't have a product that people wanted to buy. They had a really cool low power Wi-Fi, but they didn't have a solution that people wanted to buy. I've got another client right now that's doing things that's in the communication space. And we did a diligence call with one of their manufacturers. And it was really interesting because this company is putting out innovations on a very regular basis. And a hardware company said it's actually pretty easy. They've had a very stable product for the last 5 years. They designed a product that's being manufactured. It's all updatable over the internet. And they change the form factor a little bit from time to time. I'm sure they've, as innovations have come along. But the idea that an innovative company could, if you put enough thought into the initial design, continue to innovate fast like a software company was something. It was really a revelation to me that that's how they were thinking about it. And so I think that those two things going together are pretty interesting. I do think though that creative tension between the two sides is interesting. I think that it's one of the areas where it's really hard to build a team. And so as the CEO of something like this, you have to have. Frankly, I think you have to have credibility to both sides, and that's one of the things that people were concerned about when Jobs died, whether or not Tim Cook could do that. And it appears that that they've managed to continue to manage that creative tension. We'll see. I see a little land down there at the end, but what else in terms of this kind of space, this intersection of the hardware and software, are you guys seeing as particular opportunities or challenges?
Well, certainly on the traditional industrial side, you have trying to instrument a lot of these devices or machines that may have been designed even before there was an internet. Involves a lot of reverse engineering. There's a lot of, I'm talking more about the industrial internet, power plants, factories, railways. These are systems that were designed so that if they fail, people die. So that's very different from an IT system going down and people not getting their email. So there's a very different culture at play within industrial and process control systems. So a lot of those skill sets are not necessarily aligned with smart people who could build an iOS app and I don't know how short it was. I'm sure it was really, really quick. But it's a very different way of thinking of the world. So combining that and having some of these businesses organizationally and culturally to bridge that divide is actually a huge opportunity. So for startups that are able to harness a lot of this, this expertise is trapped in these big companies and people who've been there for many years. And if there's an opportunity, I mean, I think there'll be generation gaps and certainly great opportunities to harness a lot of if this theme comes back again, getting value from underutilized assets, which is exactly what an Uber does or an Airbnb. Harnessing some of this expertise out there is another opportunity.
Comments, thoughts from the audience as we go along here?
Actually interested from the hardware space, how much reliance you put in your contract manufacturers as opposed to the hardware personnel that you have on the team itself. How do you control between the two? Obviously, these manufacturing companies bring a lot of expertise to the table, but it's your product. So how do you decide on that?
Well, I mean, there are different kinds of contract manufacturers. There are some that just manufacture. You go to them, you're 100% ready, and they have no internal expertise at all. And there are some that have internal expertise. So the first step is actually figuring out what the needs are of the company. I think the second step is if you are going to use someone with expertise, especially overseas. We manufacture overseas. Something we learned early on was the criticality of having it completely managed locally by your own team. Because as much, we're at a manufacturer that has over 100 engineers and very smart people, but because of language barriers, cultural barriers, way they do business barriers, we learned a lot through the process. One story was early on, when we were, one of the first iterations of the product, before we had someone on site, our contract manufacturer called us and said, "Great news. We found a better way for you, for the antenna and the Wi-Fi module to connect. We moved it from one of your boards to another board, and we think it works so much better now." We're like, hold on. We've just spent the last, I don't know how long building this. You can't just take, Wi-Fi module, move it from one board to another without talking to us about it. And, in that case, we moved it back. Other suggestions they had, we took. But the point was that, hey, welcome. Just on time. We just started 1 minute ago. So okay. But the point was that we knew immediately that unless it's watched carefully with our own people, our own experts, then it wouldn't be an effective process. Now, there are lots of companies, just to add to that quickly, there are lots of companies that completely outsource everything. And that's an approach, and it's a fine approach, if that's your approach. There are many companies that will go to, Flextronics or another company and just say, "Please develop this for us. Here's a drawing on a napkin. Come back to me in 3 months if you have a prototype." You're not going to get it, a great product probably, but you might not need it for the business you're in. So there's just so many options out there. It's almost an infinite number of combinations. But the biggest learning for us was the more you control, the better the product turns out in the end.
So Alex, I've already told them about you and what you do, and in fact, you set up this part about being a software company versus a hardware company, and so I'm going to throw you right, not quite under the bus, but I'll throw you out there. Talk to us a little bit about what you've been thinking about as you think about moving from, what led you to say, okay, well, we're a software company, but maybe we should build a hardware device. And how did you come to that realization? And what are the challenges that you're facing right now with that? And then we'll come back and ask the audience a couple of things.
So first challenge is that as a software guy, I thought everything was possible. Everything is easy, right? You just take a book, learn a new language, and it works. Well, hardware is not like that. So we iterated a couple of times. We started building some prototypes by ourselves, me and the team, and it was complete failure. So we really focused on using off-the-shelf hardware. A number of companies started like that. I mean, Dropcam, for example, they started with Access Camera. They ended up making their own software. So basically, we really thought we didn't have the right mindset for hardware. I think it's really a completely different world. I mean, they're getting closer, right? Because we have different development tools, prototyping tools, so it's getting a little closer, but it still is very different. So actually, I'm flying out Saturday to France to get our first prototype for our first device. So we'll see if it's a nice, device or not. I'll show it to you. You'll tell me what you think. But yeah, it's so we decided to still make that piece of hardware because it really makes the scaling of our business a lot easier.
It's good. You came in. You were fairly consistent in what you said with what other people have talked about in terms of the need to have a product person. So, do you guys think that do you need a real product person at the helm, or do you hire that expertise in? So, you're a software person. Would you hire somebody in, who is more on the overall product imagination side? And Christina, the same thing for you. I mean, you're doing fashion, so at a certain level, you can, maybe you have your own fashion sense for that, or do you bring somebody else in who's the product person who really kind of tries to synthesize the market needs, the capabilities of the company, and things like that? I'll ask you first, Christina, and then.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of that myself right now, but I think as we grow, yes, that's definitely important. I think, more important is that we have people who are good and knowledgeable at what they do. So going back to the manufacturing question, at the beginning, no one on our team had manufacturing expertise, so we joined an incubator out in San Francisco called Highway 1, and they are connected to a big manufacturer overseas in Asia called PCH. And so that gave us access to manufacturers, and they helped us build our prototype to get it ready for manufacturing, and that was really helpful. But as soon as we went into the manufacturing stage, even PCH has never built a product like ours before. So it was really important for us to then hire people who've had manufacturing expertise, who've had jewelry manufacturing expertise, to be on the ground with them, working really, really closely with them to make sure that our product is exactly to our standards. And so I think, I think it all depends on your product at the end of the day. If it's something that, has been done before and there's similar things out there, it might be more easy to give the control to someone else. But if you are building something completely new from the ground up, it's probably wise to get people who have experience doing it.
Makes a lot of sense. Elder, go ahead. Back in the back, we'll start there.
As security and privacy continues to grow, what are you guys doing to be preventative of the information?
Just to repeat for everybody, that as security and privacy concerns grow, what are you guys doing to protect the information that's being collected or transmitted by your devices? And I'm actually I'll start with Adam. He's inside people's homes with the camera.
Yeah. Security, and we're a security company, so it's the most common topic inside our company. We have a security team. My background is in security, and many other people inside the company, and it's just like many things, like what type of product you build. It's just a choice. From the start, you have to decide what level of security is important to you, how important security is in general, and make the choice if it's going to be part of the product or not. Last year, there are a few months, I don't know if we ever talked about this publicly, but we stopped complete production, software, hardware, everything for 2 months, just to do a full security review. And we hired 3 external firms. We have a team internally. We just wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. We hired 3 firms for the embedded security. That's the software that's in the hardware and the device. for cloud and app security, and for full stack security, to just review everything we've done to make sure that nothing was missed. It's such a critical topic, especially for a company like ours, where we have video inside people's homes, but really for everyone that has any information, any user information. It is obviously not an important topic for most companies that are out there. And
we say not an important topic, that they're just not thinking about it. I think it's an important topic for everybody, honestly.
Well,
But it's
it
just
should be an important.
Right.
So, as an example, we have a module in our device. I don't want to name it, but let's just say it's used by maybe about 10. It's been put in, but maybe about 10 billion devices out there, and we did a full security review of this component. It has software on it, and we found some security vulnerabilities. So we went back to the company that makes it, said, well, we need to modify elements of how this device loads to fix the security. And they said, well, no one's ever asked us to do that before. I said, all right, well, we need to do it. We've identified these vulnerabilities. And I'm not exaggerating that it's been used billions of times, this one module. It's an inexpensive module. It's used in many devices. The likelihood of a risk is small. But you either take it seriously or you don't, and some other companies. I'm not saying no one else takes it seriously, but many companies don't, and that's why we see so many vulnerabilities and that are found daily.
So I do think there's a timing issue here. Zack, as an investor, right? People have to have a product. There's an element where first thing you have to do is figure out if you've got a product people want to buy. And it's a little bit, frankly, a little bit like legal stuff for a company. There's an element where you can do everything. We try to encourage people to do things right, but there's a timing issue. There are more consequences the more you have a product in the market if you haven't done the work appropriately, whether in whatever area. So how do you think about this as an investor? At what point do you start talking to people about security? And how much of a part of your investment decision is it as you think?
It depends a lot on the product, right? Depending on what the liability could be for something going wrong. I think that many companies, though, sort of gloss over it, as Adam said. And part of the reason is because it's not something that's necessarily demanded by customers. It might be expected, and then people get really angry when something goes wrong, but they don't know what to check for. There's no certification that's out there that tells you when something's safe or not. As technology becomes increasingly complex and intertwined, it becomes really difficult to rat out what those security risks and challenges could be. And you're seeing that play out in very public ways with really big companies that are supposed to be sophisticated.
The POS and credit
And
card
they're not,
scanners,
and it goes all the way down to the user level too. I mean, like passwords is so broken. People, you could have the best security stack in the world for your product, but if
my password 123 isn't
if you
the
can
right.
access it by typing, password or whatever your word is, and someone hacks some non-secure service and learns your password and then hacks your secure service because they now have full access, that's a problem. And so there are a lot of issues there, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Is my prediction.
And I suspect so too. I think it's like the guy that I know who was fixing his house and he had to replace a bunch of plumbing and he put all copper in and he said it costs so damn much. I wish I could put plexiglass so you could see the copper pipes behind the. And this is the same kind of thing. This is plumbing, right? This is stuff that you're not going to get. People aren't going to buy it for that, but they will get pissed off if you don't. And the question is, can we start to make it more automatic? Can we build the tools in behind it? And I think that Adam's experience with a vendor who basically said nobody's asked before and why should we fix it is probably pretty typical.
There's one more thing that's kind of a separate topic that I just want to talk about because I think it's interesting. One mental model we have internally is like always inverting a problem. So always thinking about the inverse. And it's easy to think about like all the things we could do. We try to think about like what are the things people aren't doing today that are really dumb? Like what's stupid? What really sucks? And how many people are customers of Time Warner Cable today? Okay. How many people have had a problem with their internet with Time Warner Cable? Keep your hand up if you had to call them to fix the problem. Okay, so a large percentage. Every time you call Time Warner Cable, you're getting to a call center rep that's being paid a lot of money. It oftentimes doesn't resolve over the phone, and they end up having to send out a service rep who might just be resetting your modem. And that means they're doing a truck roll. They're spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on every customer to deliver a terrible experience all around. they have a product that's been connected from day one, your cable modem, right? And when my cable modem goes down, Time Warner knows that. They have to know that. Why don't I get some automated text message or email that says, we notice there's a problem with your internet connection. Here are the 5 steps you can do on your own. That's not going to cost us anything for you to do this. And this will resolve 80% of problems. If you still have a problem, call this special number and you'll get a hold of someone. Like, you can deliver such a better customer experience and such a better service. And somebody's going to figure out how to do that in a world like the world that Time Warner is in, and win customers that way. So I think like there are so many simple things that can be done, whether it's confirmation that something's going well, notification that something is out of spec, and then simple action on those bits of information that haven't even been tried yet. And I think we're going to see a lot of those types of ideas proliferate over the next few years.
That's really, I think that's definitely true, and I think that people who can do that, this communications company basically says we can tell when there's an internet outage someplace, and we can route traffic around it, and we can let people know that that there's a problem. Yeah, same kind of thing, that everybody knows they're pinging the devices all the time. So I think that's a good simple one. Go ahead.
I think in terms of medical device development and Internet of Things, it's a very fascinating area in terms of data security issues. That's a very prominent issue. I think that FDA may in fact have spoken to those issues. So it's not something that you can ignore. So I'd be very interested in terms of the French scientists in France, because you have, I think your health system is completely different. Your fees cannot be raised if you're at risk for certain conditions. Do you find there's less concern with medical devices for security of information because the health insurance system is so different? I think it's a different issue.
Although I'd say European data privacy issues are huge. I mean, the European Union data privacy rules are so extreme that in many cases, U.S. companies have real issues operating over there. And I think that gathering the data, for instance, with what Alex is doing with cameras out the window and collecting and anonymizing data, my guess is you would have a much harder time operating in Europe.
But that's different than medical data.
It is. He may not have much about. Maybe beyond the scope of the panel's expertise, though, I think.
I do think the FDA recently decided that they would not be regulating medical applications, which is a pretty big deal. So there should be a.
Well, they've lowered some of the barriers to having mobile apps approved. I mean, they're trying to streamline that.
Yeah, HIPAA and
You still have to have
privacy
HIPAA compliance for sure.
Go over here real quick. Go ahead.
From the Internet of Things, right? From the very beginning, you need to have the sensor, the microcontroller, then you have the product, then you build a platform, then from the platform you gather the data, and then the data analysis. For the whole, and also you have the security to monitor the whole thing. So for the whole chain, right, from the investment point of view, which part is the best to look at, right, and from this point?
There's a great comment that Dan Ford, who's chief of IoT strategies, made at Dell. He made a couple of times. There are no sweet spots in the Internet of Things. So seriously, I mean, there's not an opportunity for somebody to come up with like a Wintel type duopoly and extract rents. It's very open. I think this is if you want to, I have some extra copies of my report if you'd like. We have some ideas. I think people are going to, there's a lot of opportunity for people to benefit up and down the stack. I have personally, my views are that anything that resides above the platform as a service, when you go into analytics and applications, are where the most value will be created, and anything that is commoditized as infrastructure is subject to economies of scale. But there are always exceptions. It is kind of a tailwind across the. It's a tailwind. It's not an inflection or hockey stick. But there's a lot of room. But nobody's got a chokehold unless they come up with some kind of intellectual property that they start licensing.
So I think we've got time for one more question. I guess we'll just go over here. I saw your hand. Yeah, pink shirt.
Yeah, cool. We discussed how easy it is to release new software. You guys are working on the technology, you can release new software, everyone gets on their devices. However, hardware is constantly changing as well. We have brand new technology at a much quicker rate. At what point does a product company need to consider the fact that they sold a physical asset that is now going to be inadequate by the time it gets to the market? Is it that you continue to be a product company selling assets, or that you have to consider switching over to being a service company that basically have a subscription and constantly giving new hardware? Is that something you guys consider? Whether or not you're
The Philips, DC example versus,
that's what I'm
so
really going to. You guys
exactly.
are selling assets. Is that something that
I've got a number of people who are doing this, and it is interesting, right? Because you sell, if you got an upfront device cost, it's $150 or $195 in your case. Probably works more in the home security system. Do you instead rent the device? They're doing this with cable modems all the time.
Is this something that you guys are
Right.
considering, and what's the challenges with that?
Innovation moves quickly, but perhaps not that quickly in many cases. If you buy a new iPhone, that iPhone is going to be just as good an iPhone in a year from now as it is now. And there might be a newer one that came out 9 months later, but the one you bought a year ago is going to be an amazing phone, and most 90% of people are going to be happy with it.
But in 2 years, you won't be able to load the newest operating system, and then all the apps that you like won't work because they need the latest operating system.
I guess the way I'd answer that is there's a cycle, and if you're not part of that, if you're not in the cycle, so if you're not as a company thinking about coming out with new products, whether you have a sales model or a service model, if you're not coming out with new products every 9 months or whatever your cycle is, then you're already falling behind. So you have to be in that cycle, and you have to constantly think about what's coming up next and how to keep innovating and keep developing. But it's innovation doesn't necessarily happen that fast from a hardware point of view. Sensors, we're looking at sensors now that won't even be available. We can't even use them for probably another 2 years or 3 years because they're there, they work, but to make them consumer ready is going to take years. So because we don't have them in our product today, it doesn't mean that the products behind is impossible to put it in there today. So we need to plan for the product that's coming out 3 years from now, what sensors it's going to include, and just think about that constant process. But you're right, there are companies that come out with products and don't change them at all for many years, and yet they've fallen behind, right?
But I also think with cloud computing and everything else, and the ability to update the firmware, that people can, a lot of people right now are saying that, I work in capital markets also, and so it's still the case that SaaS software companies or any kind of subscription-based business has a higher valuation than one that principally sells hardware. That's because they've got predictable revenue, and you can layer it on, and they've got revenue. It's not so lumpy, and so what people are doing is, they're either they're considering the hardware device an entree into a long-term relationship. If you can keep your churn down once you get out there, then you've got a good situation because you're getting revenue from people over time. Whether or not you do automatic upgrades or you make available new products for people to buy at a discount to our current customers or whatever else, that piece of things, that innovation is always happening, but sometimes it's happening at the software layer where you're adding additional premium services, sort of land and expand, get in there to do something basic, and then they start to buy additional services. So maybe eventually it's only, it's an alert if the smoke alarm goes off, and then it becomes, you add the other things at an additional rate. And so I think the business models people are doing, it's focused very much on how can we generate, it's a razor and razor blades concept. How do we generate revenue over time?
Can I make actually one comment where I think we may see some of the most drastic change? You made you alluded to asset intensity of certain industries, and let's dream a little bit. Think forward about 15, 20 years. What's going to happen to the auto industry, right? Because when you combine autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, your car is like if you have a car in New York, it's probably not being used 98% of the time. So if you can have completely autonomous, networked Uber-like services, why do you think Uber, Apple, Google, and Tesla are all developing autonomous cars? Because in the future, you will buy a transportation service and BMW already has something called Drive now, which is a little bit like a Zipcar thing. But you don't care necessarily about the asset unless it's like maybe it's a sexy sports car, but that's a different thing. But if you just need to get somewhere, you have this reduces asset intensity. I got to tell you, the automakers are freaking about this because what's going to happen is this actually reduces the asset intensity, the number of units that you need by a factor of estimates of like 8 to 1 or 15 to 1 fewer autos that you need in a world like this. So, extrapolate that to other industries, and you got some big changes ahead. But on the other hand, it's resource intensive, and it's kind of friendly, and you combine that with some clean energy and the stuff that's happening with battery technology and solar. It's going to be really transformative too.
I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming and for your questions. I do think that this highlights how much there is to be done. And I think it was interesting in particular a couple of the comments about, look for the problem that hasn't been solved yet. Look for some of those simple things as you think about these and developing companies, and also the big, some of these big disruptive ideas. It is, it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's gonna be a lot of bets being made. A lot of stuff's against the wall that's not going to stick. And so good luck to everybody who's actually developing a company. If you have questions, we'll make sure that obviously people's contact information and Twitter handles and things are up there. But feel free to reach out to the panelists, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.